Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Kungana Africa project, where our mission is to break down the barriers that divide our beautiful African continent. Kungana is a Swahili word for connect. It is through the Kungana Africa project podcast that we connect with our brothers and sisters across the continent and in the diaspora. The time for unity is now. Our generation is the one that must undo the artificial boundaries that were introduced by European leaders in 1885 at the infamous Berlin Conference. In that conference, 13 European states, the United States, and the Ottoman Empire converged on Berlin at the invitation of the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck to divide up Africa amongst themselves. The outcome of this conference heightened colonial activity by the European powers. In many respects, this conference was the crucible for future inner African conflict. In every episode, we will focus on one specific country to provide our listeners with context on how we became a divided people. In this episode, we will focus a bit on the history of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, the land of Koffi Olomide, Dikembe Mutombo, and of course Patrice Lumumba. After the Berlin Conference, Belgium and King Leopold II controlled the then Congo Free State. King Leopold took personal control of the land. Since then, the DRC has experienced corruption, inflation, and several regime changes. The DRC was then known as Zaire between 1971 and 1997. Two civil wars in the country have turned into the world's deadliest conflict since World War II. So our second voice on the Kungana project will take us on a trip across the African continent and North America. So with that, it is my absolute pleasure and privilege to introduce to you Mr. Alain Katompa. Alain, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, and thank you for having me on the show. Alain Katompa, simply put, a child of the DRC, but a citizen of many different countries that I've been able to live in and experience different cultures. A 32-year-old man, have studied in North America, and as well as a professional career across several continents, Africa, North America, South America, and Australia. And I guess one of the things that I would just like to say is that through your introduction, there's a lot of sadness and reflection that I put on when I listen to the history of the DRC, because it's very close to my heart, and that's who I identify myself as. But I guess we'll get into that throughout this hour. And thank you again for having me on the show.
No, as I said, it's an absolute pleasure. Perhaps just to be certain, were you born in the Democratic Republic of Congo? I am aware that your parents are of Congolese origin, but is that where you were born?
Yes, I was born in the DRC. At the time, it was Zaire, in a city called Lumbashi in the Katanga region.
What are some of your early childhood memories when you think of the DR Congo Zaire back then?
Look, I think that there's not one thing that really comes out at me, because I had moved from the DRC at the age of 5. But what I can say when looking at least at pictures of when I was growing up, and also listening to stories, one thing that's completely the opposite of the current situation that people are experiencing is that you have this sense of happiness, and you have this sense of people trying to, I guess, to strive with what they have, considering that they don't have much. So I guess my memories are as a young boy growing up was really people being happy around you, or feeling the warmth of people around you, despite current situations that they were going through, or the miserable situations that they were going through. I guess it doesn't leave you with much, but being able to travel from the DRC and into South Africa in the early 90s, I think it was a very different experience, even as a child, because you're coming from a francophone country and then into an anglophone country, and in that period of time in the early 90s in South Africa, it was also South Africa was going through their own challenges. So moving here as a child, you actually felt that difference as well, despite the fact that I was 6 years old. So look, those are the type of memories that I have whilst growing up. So not necessarily anything jumping out at you, but just feeling the cultural differences, but yet still the warmth of people around you in the DRC and the differences here in South Africa and moving here as a child.
Yeah, just maybe out of curiosity once again. So you left the DR Congo at the age of 6, but when you were in the Democratic Republic of Congo, what language, what was your home language or the language that was spoken in the house?
So, well, to answer your question, it's we spoke French. As you mentioned in your introduction, the DRC was a colony of Belgium. Pretty much everybody spoke French, and at home we spoke French. But being originally from the Kasai region, my parents spoke their native language, or their home language, being Chuluba, of which I would hear my parents speak the language, and obviously learn through them speaking to each other. So, but at home I spoke French, and my parents spoke in Chuluba.
Okay, so your parents spoke Chuluba, you speak French, then you arrive in South Africa at the age of 6, which is in South Africa, that is the age where you start your primary school. How was that transition from the DRC to South Africa as a 6-year-old who spoke a different language?
Yeah, I think it was very challenging in the sense that, you come to a completely different country. You have to learn a new language, and as kids, one thing though as kids is that you're able to communicate with other children through playing, which facilitates the transition as a child moving from one environment to another, especially when there's different languages or that may be seen as a barrier. So you as a child, I believe that you learn very quickly through the interactions that you have. I would say for myself, it wasn't as difficult per se to learn the language or interact with friends or colleagues at school, and I guess the entire time that you spend at school enables you to facilitate that process of learning a different language. In the DRC or in Lubumbashi, where I used to go to school, predominantly all my friends or all my colleagues were of I guess you would say were black. But when I had moved to South Africa, in the area that we were living in, the school that I went to was predominantly white. So that was a bigger transition for me than the language aspect that I needed to learn.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because when you go to a black school and everyone at the school speaks English, your experience is quite different from going to, I suppose, a white school, even though the language is similar. So yeah, I think I get what you're saying about cultural differences. So you start primary school. How was that experience for you? And do you think, was there anything that you can recall from either primary school or high school that you feel contributed to the person that you are today? And perhaps before you answer that, school is quite an interesting thing, that when you're going through it, you don't think about it, you don't experience it as going to school, but it's only when you reflect much later in life that you realize that certain things may have contributed to the person that you eventually become. Do you have some of your maybe early memories from primary school or high school that you believe contributed to the person that you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very interesting question because today I consider myself as one of those individuals that can go anywhere and when I say anywhere is move to any environment and have the ease of settling in without a fear of what I may be or what I may face when I move into that environment. That drastic change from moving from the DRC and commencing primary school in South Africa and with those different cultural aspects has heavily contributed to the person that I am today. I think that transition allowed me to see beyond those cultural challenges that one may see as barriers to moving or to succeeding in an environment, of which I had to face at a very young age. And I guess that the journey didn't stop there, or the learning of it didn't stop there, because at the age of 12, we picked up as a family and moved to Canada, which was another transition in terms of culture. So and moving to Canada was the commencing of my high school. So as time went by, and moving from different area to the next, as part of my childhood memories, that was I guess that contributed heavily to what I can do today. So today I work for a multinational company where they can ask you to move from one area to the next, and some people find that very challenging. But from my point of view, I think it's just a normal aspect of life for myself. So I guess if I were to make it very clear, is that the biggest challenge or the biggest memory is moving from one area to the next and being able to I guess to strive in those environments despite the differences that you may experience.
Yeah, so I wonder if it's coincidence that when you were 6, you moved to South Africa, and that was the time when you had to start with your primary education. So at the age of 12, just when you're about to start with high school, you relocate to Canada. You mentioned earlier that adjusting to an environment where you were a black African going to now school with white Africans, it's quite an interesting thing in that, yes, you go to school, but after school, the people around you are fellow Africans. Now you go to Canada. How was that transition for you from the continent, the motherland, so to speak, to Canada, which is predominantly a white country?
It was a very interesting experience because we ended up moving to a small town in northern Quebec called Rouen-Noranda. And my sister and myself, I have a younger sister, were the only black kids in the entire school. So you're moving to an environment where there's some white people who have never physically seen a black person. You know, I remember when we moved to Rwanda, one of the and this sounds like a joke, but one of the kids came up to me and he asked me, so why are you so I guess tanned, right? It was in French. Why? Pourquoi tu es tellement bronzé? But he asked me, why are you so tanned? And for him, it was he was looking at another child who happened to just be in the sun for a long period of time, and he got tanned, and therefore his hair became a bit harder and curlier. So and this was very interesting to myself, especially because you assume that the world is informed even when you are a child, because coming from South Africa, where you have a mix of white and black, you would think that everywhere else is the same, you know. but you get to a place where it's not necessarily the case, and you kind of have to reframe your mind and say to yourself, well, it's either now that I'm going to embrace this difference, and make the most of it, or I'm going to be intimidated by it and curl up in my corner and let life take over you. But we always looked at it as an opportunity to actually make new friends and learn a lot of where we were, and actually excel in some of the things that we couldn't have the opportunity to excel in when we were back in South Africa. Because I mean, look, you go to a place where you're very good in sports because they're not exposed to the same sports as you were, and so there's all these things when you move from one area to the next. But it was a very interesting experience, and the town, it was a town with a population of 40,000 people. You quickly become very popular because you are the minority in every sense of the word. And there's also and I'm speaking about the positive aspect, but there's also the negative aspects where you also had people who weren't very accepting, people who weren't accepting because you were different. I didn't really experience that in school per se, but I did see some of the challenges that my father faced, because you see a black man coming to becoming the director of many white men, and some are not comfortable with that, and for me that's just a lack of acceptance that they had. So you experience that as a family as well, So I guess all of that put together gave me a stronger foundation and a stronger basis of learning what being in a different environment means. Because remember, when you're in primary school or when you're still starting grade one, your maturity is not at the level as when you are in high school. You start understanding things very differently. You're starting to become aware of things in a different way, because your access to information and your exposure to the world is also very different. So to very different experience, but a good experience that still contributed heavily to the person that I am today.
That's quite interesting. And you touched on sport earlier. I think the point you were making, that you suddenly found yourself being good at sport, or at least being viewed to be good at sport. And I always find it interesting that in many respects, as much as Africans historically have been suppressed or even oppressed, the one equalizer has always been sport. So when you went to Canada, did you feel that you were good at sport, or was it the matter of you going into an environment where, as an average African, you could go into a Canadian environment and excel still as an average guy, but given the fact that, or how they view sport, did that give you an added advantage as an African?
Look, I think it's a bit of both, and maybe my own ego is not going to let me say that I was average, and I went into an environment where things could have been were a bit easier for me. But look, I think it was a bit of both. So in for instance, I'll give you an example. So in Africa, or in South Africa, basketball is not a sport that is a popular sport. It's we know of it, and some of us, and only recently that we're trying to promote basketball in South Africa, or in Africa. Moving to Canada, I never played basketball at all. And it's a sport that North Americans love to play. I excelled in that, and I think it's because my physical attributes and enabled me to excel in it. So that was easy. So that one I would consider as because of not because I was average, but I think it's because I was actually great at the sport. Now, when it comes to soccer or to football, we know Canadians are very average at the sport, or pretty much all North America is very average at that sport. I wouldn't consider myself a great soccer player even when I was in South Africa, but when I was there, I was great. I was the star man. So I think that's why I can attest to the fact that I'm not going to completely say that I was useless when I was or average in South Africa, but there are things that I took advantage of because of the averageness of how they played their sports in Canada.
Okay, so you start high school in Canada. Is that where you finished off, or did you move before you completed high school, or is that pretty much it for in terms of your high school qualification? Did you spend all that time in Canada?
Yes. Moving to Rouyn-Noranda, which was the small town that I had said, 2 years before I finished my high school, we had to move to Toronto, which was a bigger city. A very big metropolis. They call it one of the most ethnically diversified cities in the world. Different experience, but yet very welcoming experience, because now you come from a high school where you're the only two black people in the whole entire high school, and move to a high school where there's everybody, from Asian, Indian, white, Armenian, everyone, of which I still maintain today that the transition from all the transitions that occurred from moving around and into this high school again in Toronto wouldn't have been easy if the challenges that I experienced from firstly moving from Lubumbashi to Johannesburg didn't occur when it did, So all of that was building up to who I am today, and the ease of moving from one place to another without actually seeing it as a barrier at all. So yes, look, I finished my high school career in Toronto.
And then what happened next? Where did you go to study in terms of your tertiary education? What did you study, and perhaps how did you go about deciding what you wanted to study? Was that a predetermined decision, or was there something specific that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, so interesting story. In high school, so the mere fact that I moved around quite a bit, I happened to find myself in my senior year of high school at the age of 16. So like I said, I kind of touched on it, that I played basketball, and my view on life was that I was going to become a professional basketball player. I had gotten recruited from my university in New York to go, and they would provide me a full scholarship, go and play in the NCAA, and see what happens after that. Because in the U.S., what happens is that you get recruited either from high school to go professional, or you go through the college route, and maybe you'll get selected in college. So at the time, that's what I was focused on. So the guys came, they flew me and my father down to New York, did the whole site visits and everything. And when I was so excited to go, my mother says, you know what, I'm not going to let you go to New York at the age of 16, regardless of if you think you're going to be playing professional basketball or not. So what ended up happening was I had put all my eggs in one basket, and I found myself at the end of high school without a university to go to, or because I hadn't applied to any other universities. I had to wait for 6 to 12 months before I started the academic year at a particular university, because I needed to go ahead and apply and go through the application process. In the meantime, my parents then again moved to Houston, and I moved with them, and I applied to the University of Houston. I was kind of down and didn't want anything to do with basketball anymore because my dreams were kind of shattered. And the next best thing for me was to go ahead and apply as an accounting major. And that came from, obviously, my father was an accountant, and I guess it was the easiest route for me to, or the route that I could identify myself working in. So and that's what I did, and I ended up attending the University of Houston a year after I had graduated from university. Look, I was still young because I finished high school at the age of 16, so I started university at the age of 17. So yeah, that was the process, and that's what happened. And went to University of Houston, accounting major, professional program in accountancy, and ended up graduating there and started my professional career in Houston.
So you moved from almost being a professional basketballer somewhere in New York. I mean, that's exciting. Most of us wish we had that career path. And a few months later, you were studying accounting. I mean,
Yep.
even without the basketball option, accounting is such a boring subject, a boring career. So the anticlimax from basketball to that. Do you think it's something that you regret not having followed through on the basketball career path?
Look, I think that everything happens for a reason, and not becoming a professional basketball player was never guaranteed. And in life, nothing is ever guaranteed. Do I regret it? No, I don't, because you never know what would have happened when I went to play for this university. I could have gotten injured. I could have never been drafted to go professional. So there's many aspects to it, and I think one thing though is that to make the answer very simple, I don't regret it because I'm happy with what I'm doing right now. So yes, we look at the lavish lives that these professional basketball players live, but one thing that you also have to remember is that only less than 3% of people actually make it professional who are within a particular sport. So would I have been part of the 3%? Would I have been part of the 97%? I don't know. But what I do know is what I'm doing right now. I'm enjoying it. So that's the way that I look at it. And I guess in one aspect of it is that, despite the fact that I was so into my sports, my parents were very about having a degree. Okay. So they said, do your sports, but you have to have a degree. You have to have an education that you can fall back on. Look, and that's one thing that I'll never regret, and that's one thing that nobody can ever take away from you, is that degree. And I guess the African influence, if I may say, knowing what it means to have an education and the value of it was just re-emphasized during when I was growing up, because they knew what it would mean, or they knew what it could mean if I didn't have it.
Yeah, but personally, I still would have gone the other way. And I'm probably being unfair because growing up, I wanted to be a sports person. So even now, when I think back,
Yeah.
I would have really loved to be a professional cricketer. But I suppose
Yes.
sometimes life doesn't always pan out the way you intend. And you'll never really know, as you
Yeah.
said, whether you would have been injured or if you would have been part of that 3%. So maybe instead of
Yes.
maybe me asking you, how was the experience when you took your first shot in front of 40,000 people, I have to ask you, what your first job was and what you remember from that experience. Sort of your earlier memories
Look,
of your first job.
I went for my first job interview, and this was at BHP Billiton to intern for the summer in their accounting program. And I was extremely nervous. I remember wearing this blue pinstripe suit with a orangish tie and a white shirt, probably looking more like I'm going to a wedding than actually going to an actual job interview, but nonetheless, I think I think it's the same experience that everybody feels when they go to their first job interview, or most people feel, which is nervousness and sweaty palms and hoping to answer the questions correctly. But what I can say though is that I was prepared enough through through experiencing or through internalizing the things that I saw with my father and kind of trying to play them back in the interview. So I got the job for the internship, and after the internship, they offered me a permanent job after I graduated that year in December. And I remember starting work in February of 2007, of which I was less nervous because I knew the environment I was going into. Very excited, first job, still very young. I was 21 still at the time, and it's like the world was you ready to take on the world, not knowing that when you start working, you don't really do the exciting things. You just do the things that everybody asks you to do. But look, I think it's a memory that I'll never forget.
I mean, having studied accounting, I mean, you say you don't do the exciting stuff, but I think studying accounting prepared you for a life like that. So I'm pretty sure you did quite well in adjusting, having studied accounting.
Yeah, look, absolutely, and the beauty of working for such a huge company was that you got the opportunity to move around and to actually, it never felt that I was stagnant and couldn't experience the world or couldn't experience different challenges or because I working in Houston, 3 months later they moved me to Farmington, New Mexico, where another small town, another very conservative town, and moving there as a young black male in a predominantly white town was also kind of had its different challenges, but yet moving from one area to the other never fazed me, and it didn't faze me at the time either. But from a work perspective, it was great because I felt like now it may be accounting, but it's accounting in a different environment, and the challenges that come with it are very different culturally, because the way that I had to engage with in the corporate office in Houston was very different that I had in the way that I had to engage with the guys at the mine in New Mexico or with the guys from the Navajo Nation. Very two different setups, two different scenarios that at least gave a bit of excitement to my boring accounting job, as you say it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's not as boring as it appears from the outside. I'm sure you always look forward to making sure that the numbers balance the next day, so there must be some fun in that. Maybe after sort of a decade in the industry, having left the DRC, you went to South Africa, then you went to Canada, and you found yourself in America. Now you're back in Africa, and you've experienced quite a bit, not only personally but also professionally. Knowing all that you know, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self? I mean, are there things that you wish you had done differently?
Things that I could have done differently. I think that knowing what I know now, if I had listened more to those who knew back then, I may have been in a more advanced place maybe in my career. So I think that the advice that I would give is that we don't value as we grow up, or when we're in our early 20s or late teens, we don't value experience. I think experience is one of the biggest ways that one can learn. We tend to believe that we know the world. We tend to believe that we are right in what our views are. And we tend to believe that we will not learn as time goes by. And I think that, or I believe that, if I could have done anything better, or if I look back on what I could have done differently, it would just be able to take in all the wise words and all the direction and all the advice that I was being given from people who had experienced life before me. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I think from what you just said now, the big positive with that for me is that I always look at life as yesterday is gone and you have today to do exactly what you wish you could have done 20 years ago. And I think that is the beauty of life, that even at the age of 75, you could start on a different path when you turn 76. So you're never really too old to put what you're saying into practice. Maybe as an African child, what are some of the things that keep you motivated, both personally and professionally? What are some of the things that when you see, you feel motivated? I mean, when you get up in the morning, what's that thing that says, get up, go do some work, make a difference in the world?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think as an African child, and especially coming from the DRC, knowing the situation in the DRC today and how it's been for pretty much ever since it's had its independence. I think that one of the things that motivate me is the fact that there is a possibility for change, and the fact that we haven't lost hope as citizens of the DRC or children of the DRC means that the change can still come. There's a lot to do in that country, and the impact that the impact of the DRC changing will filter down to changing some of the neighboring countries in Africa. Because if you look at the map, I strongly believe that the DRC is the heart of Africa, and when the heart is not working to its full capacity, everything else around it is impacted negatively. So I'm very driven to see that one day that country will change, and professionally, what wakes me up in the morning is the fact that I believe that I can contribute. My contribution adds value where I'm at. Otherwise, I wouldn't be there. And otherwise, the people who have employed me wouldn't want me to be there. So as long as people have confidence in who I am, then I need to go ahead and give my contribution. And that's what gives me the strength to wake up every morning and do the best that I can wherever I'm at.
I mean, I have to agree with you when you say that you view the DR Congo as the heart of Africa. And I think that explains why, for most of us, we want a successful Democratic Republic of Congo, because success in the DRC, for me, represents success in the rest or on the rest of the continent. So yeah, I do share your sentiments there that success in that country is Africa's success. So yeah, hopefully things will turn around. and the country will finally realize its true potential. And maybe on the flip side of some of the things that motivate you, there must be things, whether it's in the workplace or where you stay, things that drain your energy. What are some of those things that you wish you could change? Sort of your things that rob you of your energy.
Yeah, look, I think that generally speaking, it's when I see the inequality that people may experience in society in general. And when you have people who are supposed to be ones who are, I guess, the champions of change, are the ones who are taking advantage of those who are less fortunate. That for me makes it doesn't make any sense to me. And as a human being, I've yet to understand how one who is more fortunate should take advantage of those who are less fortunate, and we see it every single day. And I guess the other side to it is that when you do see it, you can't just see it and sit back and not say anything. You gotta step up. You gotta voice. Otherwise, it will continue. And going back to the DRC, that's exactly it. You have people in power who are not doing what they are supposed to be doing, who are not there for the reasons that they're supposed to be there for. And that's why we're experiencing what we experience today. So yeah, essentially it's that. It's the taking advantage of those who do not have a voice or do not have power to be able to fight for themselves, and that's where I have a big problem.
Yeah, maybe the next question is somehow related to that. As an African, where do you think the continent is failing? I mean, you've touched on the Democratic Republic of Congo, but generally speaking, the continent was carved up in 1885 and artificial boundaries were introduced. We've never really recovered from that.
Yep.
I mean, when you think of Nigeria and Biafra, what happened in South Africa, essentially everywhere else except maybe in Ethiopia and Liberia as the two countries that were never really colonized, or they were not part of the 1885 agreement. What, in your view, are some of the failures of our continent? And perhaps what are some of the things that you feel we are succeeding at as the African continent?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think that one thing that we need to do as Africans is we need to take responsibility for our own destiny, and yes, it may be difficult, but nothing good comes easy, and I think that if we don't take responsibility and have one vision as to how we want Africa to be, and I'm not saying now just I'm not saying the DRC or South Africa or Zimbabwe or whatever. I'm saying how we want Africans to be perceived. We need to take responsibility for that. So that being said, there are barriers which are also self-imposed by Africans, which I believe are not allowing us to actually have that one vision. And those barriers are things such as us being very, I guess, in a way, being very, I guess, tribalistic, if I may put it that way. So we separate ourselves in that way. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't embrace where we come from, but I'm saying that embracing where we come from shouldn't be a barrier for us to work together, and simply that's one of the things that still stop us from achieving our full potential. But in the same token, I think that there has been strides in various different countries. So you look at, for instance, in Tanzania, what's happening there, and the rebuild of that country, and the focus on getting corruption out of the system. They're doing a very good job there. So there are some instances where we do see very good examples of governments putting measures in place, or putting measures in place in order to get the country right and on the right track. But I think we're still very far away from doing that, because I think the first issue is that we need to come together as one, and have at least one vision to say, okay, how are we going to go ahead and be perceived by the entire world, or by the entire community that's out there, as being successful. And as long as we are deemed to be inferior by the community out there, nothing's ever going to change.
Yeah, and maybe what's worse than being perceived as inferior is when you as an African start believing that. And it's probably the biggest success of not only the 1885 conference, but the whole, if you take South Africa, for example, the whole apartheid system, that the success of that design is where
Yes.
even post-apartheid, people still believe that they are inferior. But when you look across the continent, there are, as you touched on Tanzania, there are some notable successes that I think if we look at countries such as Botswana, you mentioned Tanzania, before Colonel Gaddafi was killed, I think he had this vision of one Africa. And perhaps it was because it was being driven by him that people were not really buying into that idea. But in Europe, you have the European Union. I mean, the United States is a case in point of a continent that just decided to be one unit. In Africa, do you think there'll ever be a time where the boundaries that we have cease to exist, where you don't have the Democratic Republic of Congo, but you have some kind of a United States of Africa? Is there any chance of that happening in your view?
I do believe that there's a chance of that happening, but before it does, before we get there, each state or each country needs to be able to come to a point where they could contribute value. And in order to contribute value, you need to clean up your own home, because when we take examples of the European Union, they don't have the challenges that we as Africans still experience today. So simple challenges such as look at the poverty line, some countries don't have basic access to water, basic access to education, healthcare. So if those simple things could be first rectified, then we can start looking at the next step, which is, okay, now how do we take off those barriers and become a united Africa Union, or United States of Africa? I'm not sure what you would call it, because if you take a simple thing such as education, and if the majority of your population is not even educated, now what would barrierless Africa mean to that individual? What contribution would that individual be able to give to this barrierless Africa? So let's look at fixing those things first before we look at before we look at being united, because we need to understand what being united actually means. So yes, the end state would be great if it's that, but let's focus on the basic things now that will enable us to get to that end state.
Okay, I mean, you make very good points. Maybe, Alan, as we start wrapping up, so I mean, the next set of questions are what I call just rapid fire questions. We've gone through sort of the heavier questions on how Africa can improve. So the next set it's more personal, but it's also light questions. The first of those questions is, where do you live now? How would you describe your city? What are some of the things that you love about your city? And on the flip side of that, there must be things that you wish were different or things that you wish you could change about your city. Where do you live now? Where do you stay?
I live in Johannesburg, specifically in the Sandton area. So what do I like about? It's very close to the office. It takes me about 10 minutes to get there. What do I not like about the city is the fact that everybody seems so uptight and aggressive on the roads. Look, I've been to Cape Town, and Cape Town seems like such a much more laid back city, you know. So yeah, look, I think that everybody just seems a bit too aggro when they're driving. So that's one of the things that I particularly don't like about Johannesburg.
Yeah, I mean, as a fellow Johannesburger, there's so much aggression on the road, but I think it's a symptom of a deep lying issue that needs to be addressed. As to what that issue is, I suppose you do find it in major cities where, as a city becomes too big, perhaps that becomes one of the downsides. Maybe, Alain, in terms of hobbies, yes, you missed out on an opportunity to possibly be a professional basketball player. But what are some of the hobbies that you still have today? Like when you're not working, what do you do to relax?
Yep. Look, what I love doing is I'm an avid fan of the English Premier League, Manchester United fanatic from the age of 6. So on the weekends when it's soccer season, I like to disconnect by watching the football games. I also love watching movies. I think it allows me to really just take a bit of time from what's actually happening in the world and sometimes embed yourself in the science fiction or and in entertainment. So so that's what I love to do in my pastimes.
No, great. And do you have a favorite quote? I mean, are there one-liners that keep you going when the chips are down?
A spider web only catches little insects, but when the elephant walks through, he takes the little insects, the spider web, and the web with it. So it's so it essentially says that there are bigger problems in life that you will experience, and some of the issues that you experience in life don't make them out to be as big because one may come through with an elephant and just turn your whole world around.
Okay, I actually like that. In terms of TV shows, do you have a favorite TV show, and perhaps why do you like that show? What is it about the show that resonates with you?
I like the TV show called Boardwalk Empire, and a lot of people don't seem to know this series, but it was a series that was based in, I think it was the early 1900s, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a story about. It was actually based on a true story in New Jersey about I guess a politician who was partly gangster, a gangster politician, if you may say. And look, I really enjoyed it because it was just a bit of a reflection of what's happening today. So even if it was about 80 years ago, or 100, nearly close to 100 years ago, people still act kind of the same way, except that they're dressed very modernly today versus what they were dressed like back then. But great, brilliant show, and I would recommend it to anyone to go ahead and watch it.
Yeah, I mean, the cast on that show is unbelievable. The performance of Steve Buscemi, Michael K. Williams, Kelly MacDonald, it's a beautiful cast. It's an amazing storyline. So, very good choice there. Maybe, I mean, earlier you touched on the traffic that you don't particularly like in Johannesburg. But the one thing good about being stuck in traffic is that once in a while you come across amazing billboards and you have enough time to really take it in. If you had a billboard, what message would you put on that billboard? If you had an opportunity, what would you want Joburgers to know?
Keep calm, you'll get there.
Okay, that is very apt. Okay, yeah. Okay.
That's the best way that I can put it. Keep calm, you will get there.
Yeah, I wonder how many incidents will be avoided by just remembering or reminding yourself to keep calm. The last question from the Kungan podcast is, do you have any last words of encouragement? And when we started this project, the Kungana Africa podcast, the idea is to be able to reach someone who is in Benin, anyone with internet access. It could be a child in Chad or some kid in Ethiopia, someone who will listen to your story and feel like, yes, I may be in Addis Ababa today, but 10 years from now, I may be doing big things anywhere, and it could be anywhere. And I think your story is testament to that. Do you have any last words of encouragement for young people who may be listening from essentially anywhere, not only in Africa, but anywhere in the world?
Yeah. Look, first of all, I think that this initiative is a great one. And I think we should actually, I know you want to reach 1,000 voices, but why just 1,000? Why not more than that? You know? And the other thing is that, Africa is the starting point, but then we could also learn from someone who's sitting in Argentina, or someone who's sitting in Australia, you know, and to become I guess a global network. But I mean, I think all props to you, Colbert, because this initiative is great. But what I would give as advice to someone listening to this is that one should never lose hope on what they dream of achieving. One should never lose hope in every aspect of life, because hope is what keeps you going, and hope is what gives you the strength to know that, you know, even if I'm dreaming to drive that Ferrari in 10 years from now, but if I don't get to the Ferrari, I might get to, you know, the Mercedes or the Maserati or whatnot. So I think that there's a lot of negatives in the world, and there's a lot of challenges in the world, but you shouldn't be despaired if you have hope. So I think that's the advice that I would give out there to someone who would be listening to this.
Oh, thank you, Alain. It's a very good place for us to stop this conversation. Thank you very much for coming onto the show. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to your trip. I mean, it took my mind from the DR Congo to South Africa to Canada to the States and back to Africa. So thank you very much for coming through. And to our listeners, you've been listening to the Kungana Africa project, and Alain's voice was really one of the 1,000 voices that you will hear over the next coming years as we try and break down the barriers that divide our beautiful African continent. Kungana Africa, one voice at a time. Please join us next time as we bring you another interesting and exciting voice. Don't forget, you can find us on facebook.com. Just search for Kungana 1000 African Voices, or our primary platform, which is on the Podbean podcast platform. You can also there go and search for the Kungana podcast. From all of us at the Kungana Africa project, please do take care and join us as we listen to the third voice. You've been listening to Kungana podcast. Cheers and take care.